The Amnesia series has been a household name in the survival horror genre for the past decade. The first game, The Dark Descent, is highly regarded by many as one of the scariest games of all time. It also propelled a lot of content creators into fame at the start of the 2010s, some of whom you're most definitely familiar with. So does Amnesia Rebirth live up to the legacy of its predecessors? Honestly, I couldn't tell. When the first game came out, I was too busy with God of War 3 and Red Dead Redemption. Plus, my laptop at the time wasn't powerful enough to run it. Fast forward to 2013, I got to experience the now horror classic Outlast, and that game was terrifying. The following week, A Machine for Pigs came out, and since I heard a lot of good things about the first game, I decided to pick it up, and got disappointed. It got so boring that I didn't even bother finishing it. And that's saying something because I've never been a horror aficionado. I mean, I got the Dead Space series and a couple of Resident Evil games under my belt, but I don't go out of my way to look for obscure or older titles to scratch my horror game itch. I tend to just go for what's popular, and almost all of them lean towards the action-oriented side of the horror game genre. You know, the ones where you can actually defend yourself. So I was really expecting The Machine for Pigs to scare the hell out of me right from the beginning, much like Outlast did. And it didn't. So the question now is Amnesia Rebirth any good? Let's begin. The players take the role of Tassi Trianon, a French drafter for the Triple Crown Mining Company, and you and your crew are on your way to a mining expedition. Not long after the intro, the plane's engine malfunctions and crashes in the middle of the desert. Strangely, after regaining consciousness, Tazi finds herself alone, still inside the plane alongside the dead pilot. She then realizes that she has lost a good chunk of her memory, with only her journal helping her gain some of it back. Your main objective now is to find the rest of your crew, all the while regain all those memories back. This is where the game begins, and this is where the game has its biggest problem.
Help! For God's sake, help me!
Similar to The Machine for Pigs, the game starts slow. Really slow. It took me almost an hour to even get a glimpse of one of the creatures you encounter in the game. One could argue that the beginning sections are all about the atmosphere, and it wants you to feel the constant tension when you're in the dark, with a thought of maybe, just maybe, something is lurking within the shadows. The sound design is good enough to support that argument. The ambient music is eerie, and the audio has a proper bite to it whenever there are creaking sounds, falling debris, or any noise that the environment spits out. Of course, your mileage will vary depending on how good your sound system is. As with any other horror game, it is highly recommended to use a good set of headphones for an overall better experience. But even with that, it's just not enough to compensate for the boring first few hours of the game. And this is not by any means a long game, so that's a significant portion of it already. So anyway, during these introductory hours, I was able to familiarize with Amnesia's core game elements, making sure there's enough light to keep your fear level from rising, grabbing and rotating objects to solve environmental puzzles, as well as finding hidden items, and of course, knowing when to run and when to hide. There's a bit of resource management, though it's not really difficult to grasp, as there's only two items you need to manage: matches and lamp oils, with the latter coming in 3 different sizes, and both of which will be used to light your way through dark places that Tazi will end up in. Based on my experience, the game is generous in handing them out. There's ample amounts scattered throughout the places that you visit. To balance this, the game lets you carry only a certain amount for each. For example, despite the many matchbooks you happen to find, you can only carry up to 10 matches. Exploration is encouraged to gather clues from the scattered notes and pictures in order to regain Tassie's memory. Sometimes reaching a certain place or looking at a certain object will trigger a flashback, giving players an insight to exactly what happened here.
Down in the middle of nowhere.
Don't worry, Jonathan. Supplies, water, a map, there'll be something, even if there's no one home.
Lycans will have gathered the plies. Bet you.
While doing so, the game exposes another one of its flaws: the graphics. Now, this isn't much of an issue compared to the first one that we talked about. I understand that this is an indie game and is less than a quarter of the price of most AAA titles, so I'm really not expecting much. Hell, that's the reason why I picked it up. It's cheap. However, there are games from more than 10 years ago that look better than this, and they cost around the same price now. The textures for the environment looks like 3rd gen at best. Character models, the ones still alive, are wooden and move stiffly too. Dismembered corpses, which supposedly induces fear to the main character, is just not frightening, and it's so weird saying this, but there are other games that can make dead bodies appear like at any time they can just rise up and grab you. But in here, it looks as if they are plastered to the ground, just obstacles you need to avoid. I guess it's for the best, since you're not supposed to stare at them anyway, as it affects Tassie's mental health, and if it deteriorates too much, it will affect the game's ending. As a saving grace, there are some visually striking vistas that you get to see later on, or to be more precise, teleport into. Yes, this game has a bit of sci-fi flavor to it, which leads us to what I like most about Amnesia: its theme and its otherworldly elements. When I first got into the army stronghold and read a note from one of the missing crew members, I thought I was in for a creature feature from the Arabic folklore, which was fine. It's still a bit different. Middle Eastern zombies capable of shapeshifting into people they've eaten. It already sounds like a good premise. Turns out, it's much more than that. For one thing, they don't shapeshift, so that's kind of a bummer, but the two types of monsters are indeed from another dimension, and as you continue your journey through the desert and the caverns, you get to visit their world. Little by little, we will all learn how these monstrosities came to be. This other dimension appears to be somewhat an ancient empire with advanced technology. This now dilapidated city appeared to have once relied on a valuable resource known as vitae, a sort of life essence that must be harvested through sinister means. Now, if Amnesia Rebirth focused more on this place and reduced the amount of time you spend in the desert, the game could have been much more interesting and will have an overall better experience. As I progressed through the story, it didn't make sense for me to start inside that plane anyway, so that's a missed opportunity right there. The game deals with a bleak and mature subject matter that is not common on this platform, and I admire the developers for incorporating such a theme, not only in its story, but also in its gameplay. Without spoiling anything much further, Tassie, our heroine, is pregnant, and the prenatal development is ridiculously fast. After you get your footing, the objective of the game shifts from finding your missing crew members to getting Tassie to a safe place where she can deliver her baby. At certain points, the unborn child will cause the screen to shake and will give the players an opportunity to reduce their fear levels by pressing the designated button. It's a nice concept. It's sweet and touching, but the frequency of it is just off. It's annoying when you're thinking hard trying to solve a puzzle and then all of a sudden the screen prompts you to press the button to calm the baby. Speaking of which, the puzzles in this game are tough, and depending on how good you are at figuring them out, this is probably what would make the game seem a little longer than it actually is. As for me, it usually takes me a while before I solve any of them. It's like hitting a brick wall every time. A minor gripe that I have is, since we're dealing with unfamiliar objects, sometimes it would have been nice if the game gives us a tip as to how some of the apparatus work. For example, this small pyramid-looking thing that activates certain doors. I get that it relies on light for it to power up, but I didn't know that it can transfer the light to an adjacent small pyramid as well. That is until I happened to place them apart at the right location. The game gives you brain-dead tips to crouch to reduce noise when moving or to reduce fall damage, so I don't see why they don't give small hints on how these alien devices work. So now it comes down to the most important aspect of any horror game. Does it bring the scares? Yes, in small increments. The close encounters with monsters are few and far in between. There are set pieces where you are forced to run all the while dealing with environmental obstacles such as barrels or locked doors. Sometimes it's a stealth section and you just have to make sure the monsters don't see or smell you. There's even a maze section with interlocking gates that you have to go through with a very angry ghoul chasing after you. I can't even remember how I got past that area. But again, these are few and far in between, and there's a lot of downtime. What is consistent is the tension that's felt all throughout the game due to the ambient sounds on the background combined with the musical score. The sound design carries this game. It creates this placebo-like effect where you will feel like there's something is watching you. Unfortunately, this effect wears off and players will eventually figure out that there's really nothing there. This exposes the game's predictability and its horror elements. It doesn't catch you off guard. Sometimes it even prepares you for the set pieces by providing you enough resources. Amnesia Rebirth is by far not the scariest game I ever played. It doesn't leave a good first impression. The story is great, and it definitely had its touching moments. But as a horror game, it's pretty mediocre, and I think having this rather sad and bleak tone in the plot and its protagonist is what downplayed its horror elements. I'm curious as to how Frictional Games is gonna go forward with this. They could do more world building on a potential sequel, or maybe, in accordance with one of the game's multiple endings, this may have already been a way for the devs to finally say goodbye to the franchise and move on to their next project. Amnesia Rebirth gets 3 matches out of 5.
Hush now, lullaby. Close your eyes, for sleep is coming. Hush now, lullaby. Mama sees, so don't you cry.